The most expensive mistakes are usually made before anyone checks the facts. The words would not be spoken until much later, but the lesson had already begun unfolding inside First National Private Banking on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Sunlight poured through towering glass windows, reflecting across polished marble floors and rows of elegant customer offices. Wealth advisors moved between meetings. Clients sipped coffee near the waiting lounge. Everything appeared calm, professional, and predictable. Then the front doors opened, and Monica Brooks walked inside. At 48 years old, Monica had spent more than 2 decades building one of the most successful technology companies in America. Her business employed thousands of people, generated billions in annual revenue, and had recently completed negotiations on a strategic acquisition valued at nearly $90 million. The final authorization for that transaction needed to be completed before 4 o'clock that afternoon. If the transfer was not approved before the deadline, months of preparation could unravel overnight. Yet none of that was visible as Monica crossed the lobby. She wore dark jeans, a navy sweater, and simple leather flats. No designer labels, no entourage, no visible signs of extraordinary wealth. That was intentional. Monica preferred observing people before they recognized her. She approached the customer service counter and placed a sleek black card on the polished surface. "Good afternoon," she said politely. "I need assistance completing an authorization connected to a pending acquisition transfer." Branch manager Karen Whitmore glanced at the card, then at Monica. Something immediately changed in her expression. Karen picked up the card and examined it for several seconds. Her eyes narrowed. Instead of processing the request, she looked Monica up and down once more. Then, loud enough for nearby customers to hear, she said, "Ma'am, this card is fake." The words cut through the lobby like a siren. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. A businessman lowered his newspaper. 2 clients near the espresso station exchanged surprised looks. Monica remained perfectly still. "Would you like to run the card?" she asked calmly. Karen laughed. "That will not be necessary." The confidence in her voice carried the certainty of someone who believed she had already reached the correct conclusion. Monica glanced briefly at the clock above the investment offices. 3 o'clock. 60 minutes remained before the authorization deadline. Plenty of time, she thought. Assuming people followed procedure. Karen held the card higher. "I have worked in banking for 18 years, she announced. "And I know a fake card when I see one." Murmurs spread across the lobby. Monica noticed curious eyes studying her. She noticed assumptions forming before a single fact had been verified. Most importantly, she noticed that nobody had actually checked anything. Karen placed the card on the counter, but kept one hand firmly on top of it. "Where exactly did you get this card?" she asked. Monica met her gaze. "It was issued to me." Karen smirked. "That is what they all say." Several customers quietly nodded. A security guard near the entrance began moving closer. Monica looked at the clock again. 58 minutes remained. The transaction deadline was approaching, but that was not what concerned her. What concerned her was how quickly an entire room had decided who she could not possibly be. And as the lobby moved one step closer to a mistake nobody would soon forget, Monica realized this routine banking visit was about to become something very different. The lobby remained frozen in a strange state between curiosity and judgment. Monica Brooks could feel dozens of eyes following her, yet she showed no sign of discomfort. Years of leading boardrooms, negotiating billion-dollar contracts, and navigating rooms filled with people who underestimated her had taught her an important lesson. The fastest way to reveal character was often to remain calm, while everyone else rushed to conclusions. Karen Whitmore still stood behind the customer service counter with the black card resting beside her keyboard. She had not scanned it. She had not verified it. She had not checked a single account record. Yet her confidence continued growing with every passing minute. Around them, the elegant branch looked exactly as it had earlier. Crystal light fixtures reflected across marble floors. Advisors moved behind glass offices. Soft music drifted through hidden speakers. The only difference was that an audience had formed. Monica glanced toward the wall clock again. 55 minutes remained before the transfer deadline. The acquisition authorization required final confirmation before 4 o'clock. If the transfer expired, weeks of legal preparation and months of negotiation could be delayed. The transaction would eventually happen somewhere else, but the opportunity cost would be enormous. Karen interpreted Monica's glance toward the clock as nervousness. Running out of time? She asked. Monica looked back at her. We all are. The answer confused Karen more than it should have. Near the teller stations, a young employee named Emily Carter quietly observed the exchange. She had initially tried focusing on her work, but the situation kept pulling her attention back. Something felt wrong. Most people accused of fraud reacted emotionally. Monica had done the opposite. She seemed less interested in defending herself than in studying everyone around her. Emily returned her attention to her computer screen. Curiosity finally overcame hesitation. She entered the customer name she had overheard moments earlier. Monica Brooks. The system began searching. Across the lobby, Karen continued building her case. You seem awfully calm for someone carrying a counterfeit card. Monica folded her hands. I am calm because I know the truth. Several customers exchanged skeptical looks. A businessman near the investment offices shook his head. Another customer whispered something to his companion. The room had already begun writing its own version of events. Monica recognized the pattern immediately. The story people preferred was usually the one requiring the least effort. Assumptions were easier than verification. Karen leaned forward slightly. If the card is real, prove it. Monica almost smiled. That is your job. A few uncomfortable expressions appeared around the lobby. The answer exposed something nobody wanted to acknowledge. Verification procedures existed for a reason, yet nobody seemed interested in using them. Emily's monitor finally finished loading. The moment the profile appeared, she blinked twice. Executive Priority Client. The designation sat at the top of the screen alongside multiple internal authorization markers she had never personally encountered. Emily stared at the account details. Long-term banking history, significant investment relationships, enhanced executive handling instructions. Everything she saw pointed toward one conclusion. The woman being treated like a suspect was one of the bank's most important clients. Emily looked up immediately. Across the room, Karen was still speaking with complete certainty. Monica checked the clock once more. 51 minutes remained. The transaction deadline continued approaching. Yet somehow the larger issue no longer seemed financial. What fascinated Monica was how many people had reached a verdict without ever asking the system for an answer. And 20 feet away, one employee had just discovered a fact capable of changing everything. Emily Carter's heartbeat quickened as she studied the account profile on her screen. Every line contradicted the story unfolding in the lobby. Executive Priority Client. Enhanced authorization privileges. Dedicated relationship management. The account was not merely legitimate. It belonged to someone whose financial relationship with the bank extended far beyond ordinary banking services. Emily scrolled further. Then another detail caught her attention. A notification banner appeared near the top of the profile. Pending strategic acquisition authorization. Emily read it twice to make sure she had not misunderstood. The transfer connected to the account was enormous. She could not see the full amount without higher-level permissions, but she knew enough to understand that this was not a routine transaction. Across the lobby, Karen Whitmore remained completely unaware of what was sitting inside the system. She crossed her arms and looked at Monica Brooks with increasing confidence. The growing audience only encouraged her. You still have not explained where that card came from, Karen said. Monica maintained the same calm expression. You already have access to the answer. Karen laughed lightly. What I have is experience. Monica glanced toward the wall clock again. 47 minutes remained before the authorization deadline. The movement did not escape Karen's notice. You seem very concerned about the time, Karen said. Should I be? Monica replied. Karen smirked. Maybe you should. Several customers quietly watched the exchange. Some had already decided who was right. Others seemed less certain now. The longer Monica remained composed, the harder it became to fit her into the role Karen had assigned her. Emily stood from her workstation. She hesitated for only a moment before walking toward the customer service counter. Karen, she said carefully, I think we should verify the account profile before moving forward. Karen barely looked at her. There is nothing to verify. Emily lowered her voice. Actually, there is. The profile contains executive handling indicators. For the first time, Karen's expression shifted slightly. Executive handling? Emily nodded. Yes, I think you should review it. Karen's face hardened immediately. She interpreted the suggestion not as assistance, but as a challenge to her authority. Emily, return to your station. but I think there may be information. Return to your station. The younger employee stopped speaking. Several customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Monica watched the interaction carefully. She noticed something important. Emily had not defended her personally. Emily had defended procedure. That distinction mattered. Karen turned back toward Monica. Until this situation is resolved, I am placing a temporary hold on processing any transaction connected to this card. A ripple of surprise moved through the lobby. Monica's eyes narrowed slightly for the first time all afternoon. On what basis? She asked. Pending verification. Monica looked directly at her. Verification that has not been performed. Karen ignored the question. Instead, she began typing commands into her workstation. Somewhere inside the system, the acquisition authorization was now frozen. Monica looked back at the clock. 44 minutes remained. The deadline was no longer a distant concern. It was becoming real. Yet Karen appeared satisfied, convinced she had prevented a problem rather than created one. Emily slowly returned to her desk, but her concern only deepened. On her monitor, the account profile remained open, and sitting near the top of the screen was a notification that made her stomach drop. The acquisition authorization was scheduled to expire at exactly 4 o'clock. 44 minutes remained. If nobody intervened, the consequences would reach far beyond a single customer standing in the lobby. The atmosphere inside the branch shifted in subtle ways after Karen Whitmore placed the hold on the pending authorization. People who had initially viewed the situation as a simple dispute were beginning to sense something larger unfolding beneath the surface. Monica Brooks remained standing at the counter with the same calm posture she had maintained since entering the building. Her composure now seemed less like confidence and more like patience. The patience of someone waiting for others to discover facts she already knew. Across the room, Emily Carter stared at her monitor. The information on the screen refused to match the narrative Karen had created. Executive priority client. Dedicated strategic services. Enhanced authorization access. Every indicator suggested that Monica's relationship with the bank extended to levels most employees never encountered. Emily clicked deeper into the profile. A restricted information banner appeared, limiting her access. However, one line remained visible before the system locked the page. Estimated transaction category, strategic acquisition transfer. Emily inhaled sharply. Even without seeing the amount, she understood what that meant. Corporate acquisitions were not routine transactions. They involved teams of attorneys, analysts, executives, and months of preparation. Delays could cost millions of dollars. Emily glanced toward the wall clock. 40 minutes remained. At the customer service desk, Karen continued documenting what she described as suspicious activity. She seemed pleased with the growing file she was creating. Every note reinforced her original assumption. Unfortunately, every note was based on a conclusion she had reached before reviewing a single verified fact. Monica finally spoke again. Have you checked the account? Karen did not look up from her workstation. The review is ongoing. That is not what I asked. Karen paused. Several nearby customers leaned forward slightly. They wanted to hear the answer. Monica repeated herself. Have you checked the account? An uncomfortable silence followed. Karen knew the truthful answer. No, she had not checked it. She had examined the card. She had examined Monica. She had examined her own assumptions. But she had not examined the account. Instead of answering directly, she changed subjects. We are taking appropriate precautions. Monica nodded slowly. I see. The response carried no anger, which somehow made it more powerful. Karen returned to typing. Emily could not remain silent any longer. She stood and approached a senior operations employee working near the investment offices. Quietly, she explained what she had found. The employee frowned. Executive priority client. Emily nodded. And there is a strategic acquisition authorization attached to the profile. The employee's expression changed immediately. Are you sure? I checked twice. He looked toward Karen and then toward Monica. For the first time that afternoon, uncertainty began spreading among the staff. Word moved carefully through the branch. Nothing dramatic. Just questions. Small questions. Questions that should have been asked from the beginning. Meanwhile, Monica checked her phone. Several messages had arrived from legal advisors monitoring the transaction. The acquisition team was waiting. So were external consultants and multiple executives. Monica typed a brief response. Delayed at branch. Authorization pending. No additional explanation was necessary. Then she returned the phone to her pocket. 37 minutes remained. Across the lobby, Karen remained convinced she controlled the situation. What she failed to realize was that the situation had already begun slipping beyond her control. Facts were moving through the branch faster than assumptions could contain them. And somewhere beyond the walls of the building, people responsible for one of the largest transactions of the quarter were beginning to wonder why a routine authorization had suddenly gone silent. 34 minutes remained before the authorization deadline. The number seemed to hang invisibly over the entire branch. Most customers did not know it existed. Most employees did not understand its importance. Yet every passing minute pushed the pending acquisition closer to expiration. Monica Brooks stood quietly at the counter while Karen Whitmore continued treating the situation as a personal victory. The branch manager had convinced herself that caution justified every decision she had made. Unfortunately, caution was no longer what guided her actions. Pride had taken control. The distinction mattered. Across the room, conversations among employees grew more frequent. Questions were spreading. A senior operations specialist approached Karen and spoke quietly. "I think we should review the account profile before making any additional decisions." Karen barely glanced at him. "The situation is under control. There are executive indicators attached to the client record." And the specialist hesitated. "That usually means additional verification protocols." Karen's expression hardened. "I am aware of the protocols." The specialist stepped back, unconvinced. Several employees exchanged concerned looks. Monica noticed all of it. More importantly, she noticed that nobody had yet corrected the original mistake. Everyone was discussing procedures. Nobody was following them. Karen opened a new internal form and began documenting further restrictions. Monica watched carefully. "What are you doing?" she asked. Karen did not look up. "Protecting the bank." "From what?" Karen finally met her eyes. "From risk." Monica nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting answer." Karen returned to typing. Seconds later, another notification appeared inside the system. Additional review requested. Transaction processing suspended pending investigation. Emily Carter saw the update appear on her screen and felt her stomach tighten. The situation had just escalated. What began as a simple accusation was now becoming an official operational issue. She walked toward Karen again despite knowing the conversation would not be welcome. "You cannot suspend processing without reviewing the account." Karen sighed heavily. "Emily, you need to stop involving yourself." "I am involving myself because the account profile contradicts the assumptions being made." Several nearby employees immediately looked up. Nobody had spoken that directly to Karen all afternoon. Karen's face flushed slightly. "The matter is closed." "No," Emily replied carefully. "The matter has not even been investigated." The words lingered in the air. Monica remained silent. The exchange was revealing more than any argument could. One employee was defending assumptions. Another was defending facts. The difference was becoming increasingly obvious. Monica checked her phone. A message from legal counsel appeared. "Status? Investors requesting update." Monica responded with only 6 words. "Branch delay. Awaiting authorization release." She sent the message and slipped the phone back into her pocket. 31 minutes remained. At another location across the city, attorneys, financial analysts, consultants, and executives were waiting for confirmation. Conference rooms had been reserved. Documents were prepared. The final approval depended on a transaction currently frozen because someone had decided appearance mattered more than verification. Back inside the branch, Karen made a decision that would later become difficult to explain. She clicked a final approval box requesting escalation of the restriction. The system generated a timestamp. Emily saw it happen. So did the operations specialist standing nearby. Both understood the significance immediately. Karen had just expanded the delay without reviewing the account. For the first time all afternoon, uncertainty began replacing confidence among the staff. Somewhere beyond the branch, phones were starting to ring. Questions were beginning to circulate. And with 30 minutes remaining before one of the largest transactions connected to the bank that quarter reached its deadline, the consequences of a single unchecked assumption were growing larger by the minute. 28 minutes remained before the authorization deadline. The number now carried weight. Employees felt it even if they did not fully understand why. Something important was happening beyond the walls of the branch, and the delay at the center of it all continued growing. Monica Brooks stood near the customer service desk with remarkable patience. The scene around her had changed dramatically since she first entered the building. Customers who once appeared convinced by Karen Whitmore's accusations were beginning to question them. Employees who had quietly followed the branch manager's lead were starting to compare facts instead of assumptions. Confidence was slowly shifting from one side of the room to the other. Karen, however, remained determined to defend her original conclusion. She believed admitting uncertainty would make her appear weak. As a result, every new piece of information only pushed her deeper into the position she had chosen. Across the branch, Emily Carter watched another notification appear on her screen. This time the message came from Corporate Transaction Monitoring. Authorization status request pending. Response required. Emily stared at the alert. The acquisition team was actively looking for answers. Someone at corporate headquarters had noticed the delay. She walked quickly toward the operations specialist she had spoken with earlier and showed him the message. His expression tightened immediately. "This is escalating," he said quietly. "It already has," Emily replied. Meanwhile, Monica's phone vibrated again. She stepped slightly away from the counter and reviewed the latest update. Legal counsel, acquisition committee, external advisors. Everyone was asking the same question. Why had the authorization stopped? Monica considered writing a longer explanation. Instead, she typed a single sentence. Branch manager suspended processing without verification. Then she pressed send. The message traveled far beyond the branch. Several floors above a corporate conference center downtown, it arrived on the phone of Robert Hamilton, Executive Vice President of Strategic Banking Operations. Robert had spent most of the afternoon preparing for final acquisition approval meetings. He expected routine confirmations. Instead, he found himself reading a message that made no sense. Suspended processing without verification. Robert frowned. He knew the name immediately. Monica Brooks was not an unfamiliar client. Entire executive teams had worked on the acquisition authorization connected to her account. Delaying it without verification was not simply unusual. It violated procedures. Robert opened additional records. Within seconds, he found the pending transaction. The amount displayed on his screen caused him to sit forward. Nearly $90 million. He checked the timeline. 26 minutes remained before expiration. Back at the branch, nobody knew what was happening beyond their walls. Karen certainly did not. She was still documenting her actions, convinced she was protecting the institution. Monica returned her phone to her pocket and looked toward the clock. 25 minutes remained. Karen noticed the glance and interpreted it as concern. "Getting nervous?" she asked. Monica shook her head. "No. You should be." Monica almost smiled. "That depends on which side of this situation you are standing on." Several nearby customers exchanged looks. The confidence in Monica's voice sounded different now. It was not defensive. It sounded informed. At that exact moment, an incoming call reached the branch operations desk. The operations specialist answered. His expression changed almost immediately. "Yes, sir," he said. "Understood." When he ended the call, he looked directly at Karen. Corporate wants an immediate status update on the suspended authorization. For the first time all afternoon, genuine uncertainty appeared on Karen's face. Because the questions now coming from corporate headquarters were the same questions everyone should have asked at the very beginning. And with less than 25 minutes remaining before one of the bank's most significant transactions reached its deadline, those questions were about to become impossible to avoid. 23 minutes remained before the authorization deadline when the atmosphere inside the branch changed completely. The phone call from corporate headquarters had accomplished something that facts alone had not. It introduced accountability. Employees who had quietly observed the situation now understood that senior leadership was paying attention. The suspended authorization was no longer a local issue. It had become a corporate concern. Karen Whitmore stood behind the customer service desk attempting to maintain her confidence, but subtle cracks had begun appearing. Her posture was more rigid. Her responses were shorter. The certainty that had carried her through the afternoon was slowly being replaced by something less comfortable. Doubt. Across the lobby, Monica Brooks remained calm. She had spent years negotiating with executives, investors, attorneys, and regulators. Pressure did not surprise her. What surprised her was how long such a simple verification process had been delayed. The wall clock continued moving. 22 minutes. 21. Every second mattered. The operations specialist who had received the call from headquarters approached Karen again. Corporate requested immediate documentation supporting the suspension. Karen nodded. I am preparing it. They also requested verification records. Karen hesitated. Verification records? Yes. Evidence supporting the decision. Several nearby employees heard the exchange. The question sounded harmless, yet everyone understood its significance. Documentation could explain why a decision was made. Verification proved whether the decision was justified. Karen had the first. She did not have the second. Emily Carter watched quietly from her workstation. For the first time all afternoon, she sensed the balance beginning to shift. Not because someone powerful had arrived. Not because Monica had revealed her status. Simply because facts were finally being requested. Meanwhile, several floors above a corporate conference center downtown, Robert Hamilton reviewed transaction reports displayed across multiple monitors. Senior legal advisors sat around a conference table. Acquisition specialists monitored timelines. The $90 million authorization had become the focus of an emergency discussion. One executive looked toward Robert. Can the deadline be extended? Robert shook his head. Not without significant complications. Another advisor frowned. How did this happen? Robert reviewed the branch notes again. The answer only made less sense each time he read it. He picked up his phone and placed another call. Back at the branch, the operations desk rang again. This time the specialist's expression changed dramatically the moment he heard the caller's identity. Yes, Mr. Hamilton, he said immediately. Conversation stopped. Several employees looked up. Karen's face lost color. Even customers sensed the significance of the name. The specialist listened carefully for nearly a minute before ending the call. Then he turned toward Karen. Executive Vice President Robert Hamilton is personally reviewing the authorization. Silence swept across the lobby. Monica simply looked toward the clock. 19 minutes remained. Karen attempted to recover. That does not change the verification concerns. The operations specialist looked at her carefully. Corporate wants to know exactly what verification was performed before the suspension. Karen opened her mouth to answer, but stopped. Because the truthful response was becoming increasingly difficult to avoid. None. Across the room, Emily lowered her eyes toward her monitor. The executive profile remained open. The acquisition authorization remained frozen. The deadline continued approaching. Yet for the first time all afternoon, she felt hopeful. Facts were finally reaching the people responsible for making decisions. And somewhere between the branch and corporate headquarters, the story Karen had built from assumptions was beginning to collide with a reality that could no longer be ignored. 17 minutes remained before the authorization deadline. The number now dominated every decision being made inside the branch. Employees checked clocks. Phones rang more frequently. Conversations that had once centered around a supposedly suspicious card were now focused on something far more important. Why had a major authorization been suspended without verification? Karen Whitmore could feel the pressure building around her. The certainty that had protected her earlier was disappearing. Questions continued arriving from corporate headquarters, and every answer seemed to create new problems. The operations specialist stood beside her workstation reviewing internal records. Emily Carter watched from nearby. Several employees gathered quietly, pretending to focus on their tasks while listening to every word. Customers who had planned to leave remained in the lobby. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Monica Brooks stood calmly near the counter. She no longer looked like someone being questioned. She looked like someone waiting for others to catch up with reality. The operations specialist opened the account history and frowned. Karen, where is the initial verification record? Karen attempted to remain composed. The situation required immediate action. That is not what I asked. He pointed toward the screen. Where is the verification record? Karen said nothing. The specialist clicked through additional screens. Then another expression appeared on his face. Concern. There is no card validation attempt. Emily immediately looked up. None. None. The specialist continued reviewing the system logs. No account authentication. No executive profile review. No authorization review. The words landed heavily throughout the branch. Monica remained silent. Karen looked toward the growing audience and felt the situation slipping further away. Unfortunately for her, the system logs were impartial. They recorded actions exactly as they occurred. Assumptions could be argued. Data could not. The specialist kept scrolling. A few seconds later, he stopped again. Karen, the restriction request was submitted before any verification process began. No one spoke. The implication was obvious. The conclusion had come first. The investigation never happened. Across the city, Robert Hamilton was reviewing the same records from corporate headquarters. Senior advisors sat around him while compliance officers examined timestamps. The timeline told a story nobody wanted to hear. A high-priority executive client entered a branch. A major acquisition authorization was suspended. Restrictions were escalated. Yet not a single verification procedure had been completed before those decisions were made. Robert closed the report and immediately stood. "Prepare transportation," he said. One executive looked surprised. "You are going personally?" Robert nodded. "We have 17 minutes before a $90 million authorization expires because basic procedures were ignored." No further explanation was necessary. Back at the branch, Karen attempted one final defense. "I acted based on professional judgment." The operations specialist looked at her carefully. "Professional judgment is not a substitute for verification." Emily lowered her eyes. She had tried to say the same thing hours earlier. Nobody had listened. Monica checked the clock. 15 minutes remained. Her phone vibrated. A short message appeared. "On my way, Robert Hamilton." Monica read it once and returned the phone to her pocket. She showed no reaction. Yet for the first time all afternoon, she knew the situation was finally moving toward resolution. Around the branch, employees continued reviewing records. Customers exchanged whispers. The atmosphere had completely reversed. Earlier, people had wondered whether Monica belonged in the building. Now they were wondering how such a serious mistake had been allowed to happen. And with 15 minutes remaining before the largest authorization many employees had ever encountered reached its deadline, the person best positioned to answer that question was already on his way to the branch. 14 minutes remained before the authorization deadline when the front doors of the branch opened once again. Conversations stopped. Employees looked up from their screens. Customers turned toward the entrance. A man in a dark suit entered the lobby accompanied by two senior corporate officers. His pace was calm but purposeful. Every employee recognized him immediately. Robert Hamilton, Executive Vice President of Strategic Banking Operations. Karen Whitmore felt her stomach tighten. Robert did not stop to greet staff. He did not ask for introductions. He walked directly across the lobby toward Monica Brooks. Then, in front of employees, customers, and managers alike, he extended his hand. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "I apologize for the delay. The board approved the acquisition this morning, and we have spent the last 3 weeks preparing for today's authorization. We have been trying to understand why it was suspended." The silence that followed was absolute. Monica accepted the handshake. "Good afternoon, Robert." Several customers exchanged stunned looks. Employees who had spent the afternoon listening to accusations suddenly realized they were standing in the presence of someone connected to one of the largest transactions the branch had ever handled. Robert immediately turned toward the operations specialist. "Status." The specialist summarized the timeline. "Executive profile. Strategic acquisition authorization. Restriction request. Escalation. Corporate review. No verification records." Every statement was supported by system logs. Robert listened carefully before requesting direct access to the account history. Within moments, the profile appeared on a nearby workstation. Executive priority client. Enhanced authorization privileges. Verified card credentials. Approved acquisition transfer. Robert reviewed the details, then opened the audit history. The room grew quiet again. He examined every timestamp, every entry, every action. Then he looked up. The card was never scanned. Nobody spoke. He continued reading. The account was never reviewed. Karen lowered her eyes. Robert clicked again. The restriction request was submitted before any verification process began. Several employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. A customer near the investment offices slowly shook his head. Earlier that afternoon, he had been one of the people convinced Karen was right. Now the facts told a very different story. Robert turned away from the screen and looked directly at Karen. "You did not discover a problem. You created one." The words landed heavily throughout the branch. Nobody attempted to argue. Robert continued. "This client has spent years building a relationship with this institution. Our executive teams have spent weeks preparing today's authorization. Nearly $90 million was placed at risk because assumptions replaced procedure. He paused briefly before continuing. The bank was never in danger from this client. The bank was placed in danger when verification was ignored. Silence filled the room. Every employee understood exactly what he meant. Robert nodded toward the operations specialist. Remove all restrictions immediately. The command was executed at once. Seconds later, the authorization status changed. Active. Across the city, acquisition attorneys received confirmation. Analysts resumed processing. Executives approved final documentation. The stalled transaction began moving again. Monica checked the clock. 13 minutes remained. More than enough. Robert then turned toward Emily Carter. You were the employee who first questioned the missing verification? Emily nodded. Yes, sir. Robert offered a small smile. When everyone else defended assumptions, you defended procedure. Emily remained silent. That is exactly what this institution expects from its people. You followed the facts when it would have been easier to follow the crowd. That prevented a much larger failure. Thank you. Emily's shoulders relaxed for the first time all afternoon. Then Robert addressed the room. A formal internal review will be opened regarding today's handling of this account. Every decision, every action, and every procedural failure will be examined. Karen remained silent. She understood what that meant. The consequences would be determined through official review, not emotion. Monica finally spoke. I am not here to decide anyone's future. The room looked toward her. I came here to complete a transaction. That is all I ever wanted to do. Robert nodded respectfully. The statement carried more weight than anger ever could. Moments later, the final approvals moved through the system. One signature, then another, then the last authorization. At 3:47 p.m., 13 minutes before expiration, the acquisition closed successfully. Nearly $90 million moved through the same banking system that had refused to trust the woman responsible for authorizing it. Customers quietly returned to their day. Employees returned to their work. The spectacle was over. The lesson remained. As Monica prepared to leave, Robert apologized one final time. Monica simply smiled. Facts should always come before assumptions. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, the transaction was complete. The acquisition succeeded. The records were clear. The audit trail was permanent. The card was never the problem. The account was never the problem. The transaction was never the problem. The real problem was how quickly people decided who they believed could belong in the room.